So I'm very pleased to welcome you today, and thank you to both the Oxford Policy Engagement Network, the Biodiversity Network, and also the great team of people on the screen at the moment who have been working very hard to organize this seminar series.
So moving on to some opportunities for academics to engage with these policy actors, especially the government. There are many opportunities. One of them is through the post-fellowships, which hopefully we will hear about in the rest of the session. And there are other all-party parliamentary groups that are cross-party groups covering a wide range of topics. And also there are select committees. And similarly, there are many opportunities for engaging with the civil services as a researcher, which includes joining advisory committees or secondments, starting at the undergraduate level through the Open Innovation Team that specifically works to assign student researchers into different departments through fellowships. So there are many structured ways in which researchers can engage with the UK government, but it is important to remember to build and continue to sustain informal networks with policy makers and influencers whenever possible.
And as we know, there are so many actors that shape policy, from governments, NGO, CSOs, research institutes, and universities. And they produce many policy and government responses as well. So the challenge is for all these actors and layers to mesh together and provide a coherent and synergized policy mix. And to achieve that, of course, scientific input from us as academics is very essential. But how can we engage with international biodiversity policy? Here, our team summarized some ways to do it, from doing internship, joining scientific committee, collaborate with NGOs and governments. And there's actually more advice in the open website and also other websites such as International Network for Government Science Advice. However, we are very fortunate today because our panelist has a great experience in this arena, and they will share the knowledge and experience in engaging with biodiversity policy as an academic, which I believe will be very useful for us all. I'm wondering what has been your experience in biodiversity policy engagement and your thought about why scientists need to engage in policy making.
So I was really lucky that when I was still a PhD student, I was invited to join an IUCN Species Survival Commission specialist group. I don't know why, don't know how they found me. And through that, I was then part of the small group that was developing the red list categories and criteria, again with IUCN. And that led me into advising CITES on their appendices. And then I've done a lot of work as a technical advisor to the Convention on Migratory Species and CITES on the Saiga antelope, one of the flagships of the area that Mohammed says is underrepresented, quite rightly. And then I've sat on various expert groups and panels over the years. And I think as scientists, I find it incredibly satisfying to be able to engage with international biodiversity policy, because it means that all that hard work in trying to understand systems and do the science can actually be useful for people and can actually help people to make better policy.
My main involvement in the international science policy interface related to biodiversity has been as an independent expert, which means a mostly advisory and voluntary role rather than an executive role. And it's been always at the intergovernmental level, so pretty high up, which is a very specific way to engage in policy. I've been, as you said, a co-chair of the IPBES Global Assessment, and I've been working actively in providing input to the new global biodiversity framework, which is being put together by the Convention on Biological Diversity.
I'm a DPhil candidate in the geography department, and my research is on Arctic biogeography. So it's not directly policy relevant, you could say, but my experience with policy in this context is that as part of my DPhil, I've done a policy internship at POST, UK Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. And my role was to research and write a briefing on climate change biodiversity interactions with a view this was in 2019, and 2020 was going to be the super year for biodiversity. So the aim was to sort of help inform parliamentarians about all the context about these two interacting issues and the international and UK level situation.
I've been involved with policy for quite a long time, because before I joined academia, I was actually a consultant, and I was working mainly on policy advice, actually on energy and climate issues, mostly for what used to be the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and also the Department of Transport in those days. And that actually included a secondment to what used to be the Department of Energy and Climate Change for a few months as well. So when I joined academia about 7 years ago, I was already quite keen on applied research, and when a small project came along in Bicester, working with the district council there to map their green infrastructure, so I jumped at the chance of doing that. And then that led on kind of in greater steps from Bicester to then the whole of Oxfordshire, working with the county council, and that was using an open fellowship, which was really, really useful, because I was able to go into the county council offices and work side by side with their key staff there. And then that in turn led on to expanding that natural capital mapping work to the whole of the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, working with the Environment Agency and Natural England. Okay, so in my case, it was kind of done for me. So I was very grateful that actually Ian Curtis, who works at ECI, was approached, I think, by Jenny Barker at Bicester District Council, because they'd spotted a funding opportunity from NERC for a green infrastructure project, and they approached Ian and said, is there anyone at ECI we could partner with? And Ian came to me and Pam. So we got into it that way, and just having got a kind of toe in the door and started to meet those people, I could then kind of broaden out my contacts to the other district councils, the county council, and then eventually to the whole of the Oxford-Cambridge Arc. So it's just a case of being alive to those opportunities and kind of seizing them when you can and trying to work from there.
What will be your suggestions for early career researchers, including DPhil students like us, to make a start in engaging with policy? Maybe you can share your experience when you were an early career researchers.
It'd be good as early career researchers not to feel like you have to do everything. So like kind of publish your 4-star papers and then influence international policy, get teaching experience, etc. It's a difficult place to be in early career, in your early career in some place. And I think it's fine if you don't want to get stuck into policy, that should be fine. And if you want to do that more than research, that should be fine. And it's nice to have a diversity of approaches, as well as kind of, I don't know, the superstars who seem to find time for everything.
Add to what else is being said is don't overlook the sectoral, the regional, the species specific, the kind of smaller scale things where you can have big influence and then move on to the other stuff. So for example, there's also corporate policy being made, which is actually really important. It's not just the big conventions. So, you know, getting into something like the Science-Based Targets Network, for example, would be handy. Getting into, so a lot of my engagement with policy started with one species in one part of the world, and then you start to become known, and then your voice is heard elsewhere. So, you know, basing it on your own specialism and looking at the policy landscape in your own specialism is important. The other thing I would say, and this is perhaps preempting the next question, is don't be afraid to put yourself forward for opportunities. I've got a lovely example of someone in my group who saw a tender for CITES, as it happened, to do a consultancy for CITES. Her immediate reaction was, I'm too junior, I'm not going to get this. Put herself forward, got it, written a brilliant report, known everywhere now within CITES as the specialist on this topic. So, you know, if you don't put yourself forward for things, you won't get them. That's a certainty.
IBIS has, you basically apply online. You look at the announcements of what are the incoming assessments, and you find the one closest to your heart. And you applied with a short form. And then you probably need your governmental focal point, or some accredited organization to back you up. Mm. As a young scientist, then you have a wonderful opportunity there, because there's a special program for young fellows. Mm. And you apply, and if you get selected, you get allocated to a chapter. And there you don't work as support person, you work at the same level as a lead author, and the convening lead author gets responsibility to take you under her or his wing. So this person mentors you to be almost LA during the whole process. So it's really an interesting educational experience. It's a lot of work though. One low intensity way to start engaging is signing in to be a reviewer of the major documents. So for example, IBES at any given time has a major document for open review. You just go into the website, you don't need anybody to back you up. You register, all you have to say, that you have to prove you are a real person and you understand something about the subject. And then you download the documents and you can make as many comments as you want. 2 comments or 2,000 comments. And the authors have the obligation to reply to your comments publicly online.
So I think it's never too early to start. I understand it is difficult knowing who to contact, and government websites are generally unhelpful, and whoever's in the department in what role is very, very fluid. So I'd often suggest you start with perhaps some of the sort of arm's length bodies, as they're called, like Natural England, Forestry Commission and so on, because they're often feeding the information through to the department and the relevant people, and they're often easier to find their names on the website. Also, just looking at who's speaking at meetings and conferences, and then just sort of approach them with very clear questions and perhaps suggestions of what you might be able to offer them. So it's a two-way involvement. So I think it's never too early, to start, and there are sort of opportunities. You might have to be a bit persistent, and also if you don't have the contacts, then try and find someone in the department who does, or has enough interest in the topic that they're willing to sort of put their name behind what you're doing.
In terms of the challenges and risks, I think that many of the skills that academics already have come really handy, but there are some particularly new skills you need to learn, and probably the most difficult one to learn is how to navigate the treacherous strait between the expert writing the reports, which are your colleagues trying to put all the details in it, and all the nuances and uncertainties, and all their favorite theories and papers on the one hand, and then you have, on the other hand, the policymaker who wants clear, simple, actionable statements, but they don't want you to tell them what to do, and they never want their countries look bad. And then you have the advocacy of the NGOs with highly compelling, but sometimes a bit oversimplified narratives. And last but not least, you get the skeptics, sincere or otherwise, who are always looking for the slightest uncertainty crack to loudly claim that you simply don't have evidence. So that is the most difficult one to learn.
It's very easy, and once you're kind of trained to critique, it's easy to deliver critiques on international policy processes or NGOs or businesses or whatever it is, and a lot of that's ideologically driven in some cases. And so I think as social scientists, the challenge is how do we work constructively with these different actors, not just critiquing them, because that's actually quite straightforward, but really understanding them and working with them. Whether that's kind of natural scientists or policymakers in government, international organizations. I wouldn't call myself an expert on this by any means, but it's kind of how I think about trying to approach it. Would be, working with, whole idea of actually understanding where people are coming from, why they're coming from like that, and then communicating the critique in a way which is sensitive. And there's a much more powerful critique if you actually base it in an understanding of why things are the way they are.
As a social scientist myself, critique is really at the core of the discipline. As Mark said, critiquing these power structures to ensure, equitable policy and science and output. And so how do we walk the line between critique, but also producing policy and making sure that policy is nuanced, or the science that we're communicating is nuanced, but simple enough for policymakers to take it up?
I do think that there's still too much of academics thinking that they can influence policy from the outside by writing a paper, and particularly writing a paper that criticizes people. So if you think about CITES, CBD, there's so many papers appearing in really high impact journals that just say, you've got it all wrong and you should do it my way. And often they're not understanding the systems, they're not understanding even the data sets that people are using in international policy. And there is no way that any policymaker will be interested in that. What you need to do is to actually engage with, have a conversation with the people who are trying to do their best in international policy, which is a very complicated thing, as Sandra was saying. And particularly if you're writing research, and this goes for early career researchers thinking about their PhDs or people writing research grants, write it with the people who you want to work with. If you want to do something that's about the CBD or CITES or whatever it is, those people should be in on the project at the beginning. They should be full partners, they should have resources put to them, and you should be discussing the ideas and the questions that you want to ask with them from the beginning, so that whatever comes out is actually useful. So I think academics get a bit of a bad name for just sniping from the sidelines. And also we just don't invest the time. NGOs are more influential because they invest the time to sit there and really talk to people and get to know people.
If we can sit with policymakers, perhaps not at the highest level, but where, for example, it could be the head of a national park, or which is, this decision could be influential, or head of his boss, and from the beginning or halfway through the PhD or the master course, in a way that to just think about what they think about the research, what they expect us to achieve at the end. So so in that way, we have developed the work in partnership with them. Sometimes that can be helpful to understand what is about the interpretation of the results we have got and how it means and that can be applicable to the work that they want to do. So that's one way I think we can be helpful. And the other way is that we usually tend to look for successful stories, but it would be equally important to learn from failures as well, because there are many failures across the board from the engaging between policy and science. So, and it shouldn't be necessarily biodiversity, it can be about, medical science too. So I think we need to look for them as well. And at the same time, we need to report them. So make sure that the other people are not making the same mistakes.